Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining us today. Today, we're going to have a very special webinar because it's going to be gaming oriented. We'll be waiting a little more minutes for everybody to join. Remember that if you have any questions, you can use your question box and we will be answering all your questions after the webinar. Feel free to write on the chat where are you from so we can understand the kind of audience we have today. You will have the chat box and there you can write all your information so we can understand your country or company. We're gonna wait one more minute and we will start sharp.
Sure.
Remember that if you need to leave or anything, you will be receiving this the webinar recording to your email. So if you have any questions, you can use the chat box or review it after today to check all the information you need to review. And now we're gonna start. So thanks everybody for joining us today. We are having a very special panel. Today we have 3 gaming experts that will be speaking about gaming strategies. First, we have Etienne. Etienne is a gamer since he was a teenager and has more than 5 years of experience in the digital industry. He spent his last 3 years working for 2 of the most important gaming companies in Latin America, Edermax, and currently he's at Gazeus Games, one of the largest casual and social game developers in Brazil. Welcome, Etienne. And we have also Simon. He has more than 12 years working with data and BI strategies in top companies like P&G. During the last years, he turned off his data knowledge to empower the gaming industry. He worked at one of the largest gaming companies in Brazil, and he's also a member of Abra Games, the gaming association in Brazil. And Leo will be also panelist and moderator and has more than 5 years in the mobile industry, working at Winclap, helping apps and games on their user acquisition efforts with data and technology. So remember, if you have any questions, feel free to ask them on the question box. And I leave you with Leo, so he can start today.
Okay, thank you very much, Maggie, for the introduction, and thank you again, everyone, for joining us today. Please feel free to ask as many questions as you want, and we will go over at the end of the presentation a little bit more about Winclap. Just really quick, we are an app-first company powered by a really strong technology to execute and to centralize all your media buying, all your user acquisition and engagement efforts. Through our fully managed service, we using our technology based on AI and machine learning, we work in a multi-channel way. This means like all the channels where an app and game can advertise in, working over creatives and performance and metrics. Of course, we got offices in Córdoba, Buenos Aires, and Sao Paulo, from where we offer our service to all the region and the rest of the world. So going over the webinar, all right, guys. Some of the topics that we have today, we're going to talk about monetization methodologies, analysis, and keys to boost it, the basics for building your LTV predictions and models, tips for engaging your audience and improve the retention of your users, identifying valued users at the very beginning of your launch of the game, your gaming launch, and of course the best practices for user acquisition, marketing, and investment strategies. So guys, the gaming industry has changed over the time, not only the product that the developers are offering, but also their user acquisition strategies. So what are your thoughts about this? What do you think about this?
So hi everyone, thank you Maggie, Leon, and Winclap for the opportunity of being here. But just like you mentioned, I mean, UA has transitioned a lot over the past few years. And nowadays we're seeing that doing user acquisition is obligatory. It's something mandatory if you want to build a business while doing mobile games. We've seen in the past games like Flappy Bird that had huge success without doing any UA. But nowadays, there's so much competition. Everybody's investing so much that you need to do UA. There's not going to be that organic traffic that's going to be just generating installs every single day unless you're paying for a percentage of those users. So, I mean, even though you can be Fortnite or PUBG that they've been having huge success, or even Pokemon Go, you're going to need that UA strategy. You're going to need to have like an investment in order to be able to compete with your competition. Like big hit games have it easier. Of course, if you have a franchise like Harry Potter this year or Fortnite, you're still gonna get those organic installs. But if you want to have a business, like you need to do UA. And just being honest, like most of us, we don't have that like huge brand backing us up. We don't have those games that we can do, oh yeah, I'm gonna work with Pokemon or any like big game. We have our games that are not really well known. So if you want to build a business with that, you will 100% need to do UA.
And I totally agree with Etienne. First of all, thank you guys for having us. Winclap, you guys are a great partner to work with. And I totally agree with Etienne on what he said. Examples such as Pokemon Go that he mentioned. I mean, although you're not doing like paid UA, they have so much or such a big marketing brand behind it, and not only digital media, right? So talking as one of the persons that was more excited about the launch of Pokemon Go, I was expecting that game to come before I launch it. So it's a different model for marketing. If we're talking about app marketing, mobile first games, you really need to do UA, as Etienne said. It is not a question of if you're gonna do it. It is rather a question of how much can you or are you willing to invest to drive a base to your product. Because whenever you're building a product or you have a product that is already built, you need a base to understand how to improve that game. So the UA budget and the UA goals that you have defined need to be defined together with the product team. And at the end, we need to keep continuously monitoring the performance of the game, driving users of quality to the game so that we can keep improving the way we monetize on it. And I think that the final point that I want to put forward is that it's kind of like a tricky area. We have such a boom on technology every year, right? So and data science has been something that is very hot for the past years, and it's really becoming something that's truly bringing value for UA. But we need to be careful on that. That we don't lose sight of what we really understand in the product. We really need to drive technology to help us achieve what we already know how to do in a faster and more accurate way. So leverage technology, but keep an eye on it.
Thank you, guys. So you both agree that user acquisition it's a key. And how do you think you identify quality users when you don't have an accurate LTV prediction yet? Like, how do you optimize your performance even if you're launching your game? So how do you think you optimize your performance at the beginning or on the launch of your game? Simon, if you want to go first in this case.
Sure. I think that pretty basic. If you're talking about a game that you want to start doing UA, but you have it already launched, so it means that you already have an understanding of how your game performs with an existing base of organic users, for example. you already have something to understand what is driving your users to stay longer, and what is driving the monetization in your game. So the first point is really understand what are the points in the game in which you know that users that reach certain level, they are guaranteed to be like a very engaged user on the long run. Look for those. Elements inside of the game that help you correlate the best with monetization. And in case you don't have anything, you can always go to the basics. You can always try to optimize towards purchases. If IAP is something that is relevant for your game, if in-app purchase is a crucial part of your design, or you can also try and look for ways to optimize retention, optimizing towards users that return day after day, or users that are more engaged through session time. And one point that I did not mention here is that you can also, whenever you are setting up your launch, for instance, you don't have a base, you have ways to try and divide your audience in a way that you already have pockets of quality or users that should be ideally quality users for your game, understanding if you're talking about networks, similar apps that you want to target on your marketing efforts, or if you're talking about other types of media such as Facebook that allows you to look into interests. That for me is like the first step. Try to look for how you can segment your base so that you know which are the pockets of quality users, and then the optimization is going to happen whenever you start buying.
Thank you. What do you think, Etienne?
Yeah, so I agree with what Simon said. So when you're first starting, I mean, you don't really have an LTV, you don't have anything. I mean, for me, I went from actually developing my own apps to working in like big companies and working with not so big companies more as a freelance. So I know it's tough, but just like Simon mentioned, like you gotta define and understand what type of game you're doing. Like, is it a platform game? Is it going to be a hardcore game, a mid-core game? Is it a puzzle game? Is it a hyper casual? Like right now, the industry, it has different segments because it has different behaviors. For example, if you're doing a hyper casual game, you're going to see a day one retention way higher than if you have a hardcore game. I mean, so it's always good to know this because you want to compare your game to other games that are doing good. I mean, you don't want to just go with your metrics and go with what you have, but just use all the information that's there. Like if you have, I don't know, tools like App Annie or Sensor Tower that you can use them free and even get this information. It's really important to compare your game and see, hey, what am I missing? What is it, all this like top players that actually are all the same genre that I am having that I don't? Once you understand that, then you can define your game like monetization strategy. So if it's like hyper casual, then probably 90% or more of your revenue is going to be from ads. So if your monetization is through ads, then you want to have a good monetization strategy towards that objective. So what is that? It's like adding different partners, selecting a waterfall that makes sense, trying to get guaranteed eCPMs. But you gotta have that mentality when you're gonna negotiate with other partners. If your game is gonna be hardcore, then probably it's gonna be more of a 40–60% in-app purchases and ad revenue. So then you don't only have to close deals with partners, but also make promotions inside your game. So how many of their users are making in-app purchases? What percentage is that? Who are they? How can I get money out of the users that are not making any purchases? And all that strategy, you got to figure it out before you're going to have an LTV. LTV, it's really complicated. Most companies struggle with that. It's not something that's easy. It requires like a huge BI team. It requires a lot of effort. It's constantly changing because if you change something from the game for better or worse, then it's going to change the LTV. So then you got to recalculate and reevaluate all the LTV like that you were working with. And that's a little bit painful, to be honest. Okay. So I mean, at first, define your strategy, do a monetization strategy towards that, and then of course just base it on numbers. Okay, what is it like? And if you don't have the numbers yet, then base it on the competition. Take advantage that you have a lot of players out there. So if you don't have a CPI, I don't have an LTV and I don't have a CPI. Okay, how am I going to define and start a campaign for it? Then just look at what the competition is doing. If your game is, for example, a cards game, okay, what's the average CPI for cards game in that country for that OS? Is it Android? Is it iOS? What country am I going to be doing UA or monetization? What are the CPIs? What are the eCPMs? All those things are out there for people to get them, and they really help a lot, especially when you're starting and you're not one of the like top players in the market. That allows you to settle a benchmark and just base and compare your numbers against one of the top players.
And I wanna add something here, because Etienne said something that for me is crucial. And I want to reinforce that. You need to understand what game you are doing, right? Everything that Etienne said about comparing towards a benchmark, that's awesome. But as he said, you need to understand which benchmark you want to compare yourself to. I have seen cases of teams in which they start punishing the product, right? Because it's not reaching the right levels of retention in new ones, for instance. But maybe they are developing, as Etienne mentioned, a game that is more towards mid or hardcore, and they are using benchmarks from hyper casual, and that's really worrisome. You may be creating a product that is awesome, you may get in great results in UA, but as you're comparing with the wrong baseline, you end up thinking that your product doesn't work. So and I think that from a personal experience, when I joined the gaming industry, I actually got in contact with Etienne. I had so many questions, and that's one of the things that I love about this industry. That if you make a contact, you can reach out and get some information. Of course, we're not talking about confidential information from the company, but the same way that we're discussing right now in this webinar, you can reach out to people that you know more about you in some area, and they can actually coach you on doing that. So leverage the numbers, as Etienne said, but also understand which numbers you need to compare yourself with.
Thank you, guys. Yeah, that's completely true. So, well, as Etienne mentioned, LTV, it's a step forward, and it's hard to predict it, and the companies are struggling on this. But when you start gathering data and you start having these retention numbers and monetization metrics, what are the main challenges when measuring and predicting LTV and building a successful LTV model? From your experience, what would you have to know at the beginning when you start doing this?
So
Etienne.
Yeah, that's a complicated question of the webinar probably. But I mean, ultimately, it's always painful. Like even every company that I've had the pleasure to talk to or that I work with has this issue. Like LTV, it's constantly changing, and by that I mean also throughout the year, you're gonna see like the first 3 years, the first quarter of the year, Q1, it's always gonna be cheaper. You're gonna have a cheaper CPI and you're gonna get lower eCPMs. And the reason why is that it's because there is less demand for the inventory. So there are less advertisers paying to run ads on other apps. So what happens is, for example, right now, Q4, it's always the most expensive time of the year. So for example, if you're releasing a game, would you release it right now? I would say absolutely not. Why not? Well, because it's Black Friday. So then if you're doing UA for your new game, then the CPI is going to be way more expensive than it should. And then you would be competing with all the branding and e-commerce campaigns that they're paying a lot of money, because they're not doing something that if you're doing UA, you got to keep it up the rest of the year. I mean, you got to think long term. If you're doing UA and you're thinking, hey, I'm going to make more money next month, then you're doing UA the wrong way. If you're doing UA, you got to think in a really long-term basis. Okay, what's the lifetime of my user? So when it comes to LTV, again, it's not only seasonability that you got to take into consideration, but also, are there any game changes? Are there any game trends? Like you can see that, I don't know, FPS are going down and maybe like fantasy games are going up. That's also going to affect your game. We've seen a worldwide decline on day one retention. So that also affects your LTV. So LTV is something that it's constantly changing. And in order to properly work, well, LTV is predictive. When you get the user, you don't know how much money he's going to make, and you can wait for, I don't know, 90 days, 180, and some companies even work with 360 days. So you can wait for that user to be on your app playing for a whole year in order to know how much money he's going to make. You got to get the user, see the first few metrics, and then yes, slowly keep like seeing, hey, what happened with this user with this cluster that I got, and you analyze that. But so the LTV measurement and prediction, it's hard because you're going to need a BI team, you're going to need tools, and it's going to be affected by seasonability. It's also going to be affected by how your monetization team is handling things. Like how does your game monetizes? Again, is it ads? It's in a purchase. How's your monetization team strategy for monetizing the users? Are you getting the most or the highest valuable you can out of every single user? Or maybe there's something wrong there that you could be doing better. Also, are you taking into consideration virality? Some games are super viral. Like some games you download them and you want to tell your friends about it. Like, hey, listen, come play with me. Other games, you don't. And there are benchmarks, but again, it really depends on the game itself. And this virality tests are hard to make because you don't really know how to measure it. And there's no like right answer for it. You can do it, you can do UA, then stop all the UA activity and measure that. But at the end of the day, there's no right or wrong answer. So I mean, it really is a double-edged sword, and you got to be really careful. In my case, I always leave virality outside of LTV, and for me, LTV is going to come down to, okay, what's the lifetime value that I get from each user on average, and then just if you have a huge PI team, like I'm lucky to have here because it's one of the biggest companies in Latam, then you're good and it's easy. But if you're a new studio, then I would base and do averages. For example, I would do an average eCPM, and then that eCPM, I would take it with the number of impressions that a user has seen in his lifetime. So for example, every time a user downloads my app, it takes 90 days for him to stop playing it. Okay, that's good. Then, you know, by day 90, that user should have just given you back the money you paid for it. So if I paid $1, in 90 days, that user has to make at least $1 for me. So you get the money back. And that way, then you're doing good UA, because that user always is going to bring a 0.1 or 0.2 of another organic user. Like we mentioned at the beginning, doing UA also increases your organic traffic. So if you know that by day 90, the user's not going to play anymore, then what's your strategy to make out at least what you paid for that user by that time? And that's complicated, but again, it's something that with the simplest and like numbers, you can do it. Of course, being an average and not as precise as all the big companies have, but still struggle. And also keep an eye that's LTV is constantly changing. So once you think like, hey, yeah, this is the amount I can pay, maybe it's something in the game changed, and you gotta do that evaluate of those users again to check if it's still viable or not. Because if not, you can. If I would work with the LTV I had from users 2 years ago, then I would be doing everything wrong because the values are completely different nowadays. So I mean, if you gotta take some tips, it's that.
As you mentioned at the beginning, also the seasonality could change your LTV, your predictions. Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you,
So
Simon.
it's.
Yeah.
It's
No,
My turn.
let's go ahead.
Before Simon speaks, I just want to reinforce that if you have any questions, I think what this question, as Etienne mentioned, is like the most powerful one. So if you have any questions regarding LTV, take advantage of these two gaming experts that can answer some of your doubts today.
Awesome.
Simon.
I really want to say that I disagree with Etienne in one of the questions, but we're still not in that one. I still agree with him. What I want to reinforce is, before I go into my talking points, is that you have very easy ways of doing LTV predictions. If you have historical data, as Etienne mentioned, you can understand how is your monetization curve until which day your game doesn't have any retention at all. So you can call it out and say that's as much as a user will monetize, and use that curve to maybe do a proxy of D7 if I have X level of monetization on D7, so I can think that at D90, D60, D100, I'm gonna get the expected return. That's the easy way of doing that, or the fastest way, but it's not the most accurate, right? You have so many elements that get into your predictive model, your predicted LTV model, that, as Etienne mentioned, it depends on game in changes in the game. For instance, you can have structural changes in the game, still having the same game, changing the flows of stages, you know, removing paywalls that are unintentionally embedded in the game, but you want to get rid of them to increase retention. When that happens, your LTV model stops working with the accuracy that we were talking that we wanted to go after. We are not doing the rule of three here. We are doing an algorithm that is supposed to learn from my past behavior, my past users' performance, to predict where I'm gonna get. That's the problem, because you cannot only look to the past. You need to look forward. You need to have in consideration, as both of you guys mentioned, seasonality. If I'm in, you know, in school seasonality, like we are on holidays, I know that I'm going to have higher retention, but my historical data from past 3 months is from school days. So it's going to use the wrong learning data to fit your model to give you the prediction that you're going to get. So my point here is that the LTV prediction model, or whatever you want to call it, that's a living product. You need to have people on BI teams, data science team, even product. If you can have someone that owns that solution, even if it is part of your team or you build it yourself, it is not something that you do once and go away and say, I have cracked it. I have my LTV prediction model, I'm done. Because 2 weeks from now, you may be impacted by seasonality, as Etienne mentioned. Your CPIs is going to go down, right? Because we're in seasonality. Yeah, it's a good seasonality for me to buy. But if my monetization is also on ads, the seasonality that allowed me to buy cheaper is also going to make me sell my inventory on my game cheaper. So we always need to look into those both elements, right? But looking specifically into LTV, you need to make sure that you have that. Product changes will impact you. Also, one of the things that I have seen that also impact a lot is the change in demographics in your game. And this could be from, you know, different geographies, a game that is present in different countries. It will have a different monetization behavior in each one of those, depending on the currency, you know, local economy, local, you know, way of games acceptance. In some countries, doing IAPs, doing in-app purchases is seen as waste of money. In other, like Brazil, for instance, in some cases, and you have other countries that understand that it's part of the entertainment. So it's the same as going to the movies or, you know, buying my popcorn. I can also pay for a game. So you have those elements that are different in the geographies. But not only that, also the way you buy on UA, you can populate inside of your user base higher representation of a type of user that your algorithm is not used to. For instance, you could in the past had a very high quality user base in which D1 retention, D7 retention correlates perfectly to your monetization because you have been impacting people that do a lot of in-app purchasing. If you expand your reach on UA to cheaper CPI users that normally tend to be lesser quality users, you could still have the high retention levels, but for those users that won't translate to LTV, to a higher LTV. So that understanding of how your user base is changing as well, you need to have in consideration for that. And I think that the final point that I have here is that the initial scenario that I was talking about only takes into consideration, you know, the monetization curve, only takes in consideration, you know, retention, because it projects when I'm not going to have anyone else on the game, but also it has in consideration monetization. So it's pretty simple to have a very round predictive algorithm, you need to understand which are all the elements in your game life cycle that correlate to monetization. So we're talking about, session time, visits, retention, as we mentioned, level of engagement, you name it. You need to try and put them all together to understand which are the events or features of the user that drive the most monetization at the end, and try to tune your algorithm towards them.
Perfect. Thank you. Very interesting. And this takes us to the next question that is correlated. And how does the monetization type of your game affect this LTV calculation? We have discussed this, but specifically, what do you think, guys? Like, you came from different type of monetization of your company. So what do you think, Eti, Simon?
So, I mean, just like UA, monetization is key for just having a business overall. If you're going to do UA, it's also as important to do monetization. I mean, monetization basically gets money. UA, you invest money to make more money next month. So what we're doing is, for example, just like Simon mentioned, I mean, you take into consideration what your game is like, how are you monetizing, how do you get money and value out of the users, and then you invest to get more users like the ones that are bringing you the best value. So something that we haven't discussed about is, for example, ROAS, that it's the return on ad spend. And if you don't have a predictive LTV, which is something really complicated to do, but you can 100% do ROAS campaigns. And by this, I mean, you invested $10 for 10 users, then you actually analyze those 10 users' behavior, and you see if those 10 users got you that money back. So have they made $10 or more, $10 or less? And that's how you know, like, how long was it, or how long did it take them to make that money back for me? That's basically, of course, you multiply that number by millions, and then you get the numbers that we are working with. But just to make it simpler, it's basically the campaigns are like that. And in order to run UA successfully, you need a successful like monetization team. Actually, it's vital. It's like yin and yang. But at the end of the day, you're going to be talking with them, you're going to be working with them, and if they see a good possibility, like, hey, my revenue in that country, my ARPDAU in that country is growing a lot, can you do a campaign? And you can run a campaign on that country and see, hey, yeah, this campaign is paying itself in like 60 days, which could be really good if your game has like an early payout. So then take advantage of it. But yeah, I mean, monetization is going to be in charge of engaging the users and getting the most value out of them. So it's as important as UA. But yeah, monetization is key, and LTV calculation, again, LTV, predictive LTV is really hard to have, but ROAS with the help of monetization is something really easy and that anybody could do. Like, hey, I spent 100, how much money did we make out of these users? And that's done with the monetization team. And at the end of the day, you can run, if you don't want to wait for all the payout, then you can do a day 7 ROAS objective. So for example, for different games, different countries, different OS, you have different day 7 ROAS. And by this, I mean, my game works that in day 7, the user paid 25% of what I paid for him. So if I paid, yeah, just $10, by day 7, that user has to make $2.5 back, or that user is not going to pay itself out. So those are some benchmarks that you can set yourself with your own metrics for your own games, that with monetization and UA, that synergy is going to allow you to run UA campaigns and not waste any money on the process without having an LTV calculation.
Perfect. Simon, what do you think?
Yeah, and to that example that Etienne said about D7 retention or D7 goals of ROAS, sorry, that's great. I have talked with several people from the industry, and one of the things that we agree on is that this is a joint effort. When we talk about organizational structure, you will see in several studios that you will have maybe a monetization team, maybe an ads monetization team, another that takes care of the local economy in the game, and the UA team. In some cases, it's the same team doing everything, which only speaks in the need that there needs to be a strong synergy between the monetization team and the UA team, because the users that we bring, and we bring with a promise of quality. That's the case that Etienne mentioned. If I'm bringing users on D7 with an acceptable ROAS, the example that he made, 25% ROAS, that translates into a quality user. If the user on D90, D180 didn't meet the goals, that may have been an issue on monetization with that user, that it was a quality user, but maybe we didn't offer throughout his life cycle, we didn't offer them the proper promotions or the proper packages for them to convert, or if it is not going to be an user that is going to convert to purchase, we didn't serve the right ads. So not to say to take accountability out from UA, it's more to put all the accountability in the table. We need to make sure that we drive quality users with fast understanding of those quality users. That's why looking into, whenever you talk with networks or with partners, looking into these 7 goals is something that is pretty much a very good time, because it's early, but it's already a full week of gameplay. So you already have a pretty good idea of the behavior of those users. Whatever happens later, it's already in the game. We need to make sure that we are capitalizing in those users so that we don't lose that chance. At the end, if we're losing money, it's bad for everyone in the company. And as I mentioned, in some cases, it's even 2 responsibilities that rely on the same team. So it's not, again, talking about dividing accountability, is actually looking together into that. That for me, it's really, really interesting. And also another element in terms of monetization is that the UA efforts that we make can impact the metrics on that are seen by the product team or the monetization team. Once again, if we are making, we can actually do something very easy. We can do a huge campaign with a very small CPI, 2-cent CPI, 5-cent CPI, and that's a great campaign if you look at it from the ROAS point of view, because if in average the user is making 3 cents and I pay 2 cents, I'm making 50% on top of my investment. That's great. But whenever you look into the overall product numbers, RPU, RPDAU, it's going to be impacted. So we need to work closely so we don't freak out when things are not wrong. And that has happened with me, that you start doing a campaign that is very volumetric, it pays out from a ROAS point of view. But if you don't have the proper communication, your ads team may think that they have an issue on their team, on their processes, right? With this flow of conversation, very easy, you can actually reach great results when we can all understand, oh, this drop in ARPDAU or ARPU, it's because of changing demographic. It's not an issue in product. That was not on my script here, but what I wanted to add, I think the importance of working together as a team, for me, it's critical. As I mentioned, I talked with several people, and there are different models to working on it, but a big point is we have 2 main ways of monetizing in the game, right? One of them is the in-app ads or ads revenue that I put here first. And one of the main issues, Etienne was mentioning in one of the examples, that you can kind of like understand the monetization coming from ads, assigning eCPM value to each one of the impressions, so you can actually have an idea of how much money you are getting from that user. That is already a model. You are attributing revenue to the users based on a model that bases on the average. There are some partners out there that are already working in impression level data that you can have much more accuracy. That's awesome. But okay, in our scenario, we're attributing manually the revenue coming from ads. It already has an error because that's an attribution model. So we have an error there, and then we add another error on the model that is actually the predictive model. So it's not straightforward. We already mentioned how difficult it is to create and maintain LTV models for its own, difficulties of working on it, but also specifically with ads, you add an additional error that is the manual attribution of the ads revenue. And in case of mainly IAP in-app purchases game, it tends to be easier because you get the actual value paid by the user through the stores or through your internal BI. So it could be easier to understand that or to create your predictive model. I have worked in both scenarios on very ads monetized game or heavily monetized games on ads, and games that are more on the 50-50 and you mentioned, and you really need to look at them as really different product, even though they may be same IP games or whatever. Their behavior is quite different, and the levels that you can expect on monetization are quite different as well. You see that I think that we normally see around 3% of your user base will monetize in a casual game. So imagine 97% of your users are not monetizing on purchases directly. They are monetizing on ads. So the biggest part of your base does not pay, but they generate revenue to you towards ads. Through ads. So it's really critical for you to have it properly attributed and properly modeled.
Thank you. And well, this is really interesting, and take us to the next question. Since you have a really small base of users that actually monetize through purchases, how does this volume and the event values affect your analysis? How do you consider the different values, like whales, dolphins, and minnows inside your games analysis? I don't know who wants, Simon, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah, my turn. Yeah, I've been talking for the last 10 minutes. I got a little bit excited on the last question. But yeah, I think that it connects perfectly with the last point that we were making. Before going deeply here, we normally see as Etienne made the example of ROAS. If you're going to work with major partners on ROAS campaigns, for instance, that's an option, they will normally look into IAP only. So that already tells you a lot about it is not, in the case of that we have 3% of users converting and 97% of the users not converting to purchases, it doesn't mean necessarily that one user base is different than the other. It means that you need to try to look for them in a different way. It's not the same rule. It's not the same, strategy to get them. So you have types of campaigns that allow you to optimize towards purchases. So you really are going after those people that will convert, and you can easily increase your base of buyers by specifically focusing on purchase campaigns, purchase optimized campaigns. But that, again, it's a tiny fraction of your potential user base, and you are missing all of the others. You have other ways to try and catch them. And that's when I put here, if the events are relevant for your gameplay, for your user, if you understand in your product life cycle that there are specific events that are critical for the long-term retention and hence long-term monetization of the users, you need to have those in consideration. We're talking about level finish, achievements, purchases, as I mentioned as well, or some kind of virtual events that you can come up with, like users that reach certain level in X days. That will be type of users that you think that are very hyperactive in your game.
Okay. Yeah.
So you need to really look into, first of all, understand your game. You already understand your game, and I hope you do. Understand the elements on the game that are relevant for your monetization, analyze the correlation there, and then use this as a feedback for your campaigns, understanding your whales, for instance, your top spenders. You can have actually ad whales as someone, Etienne, I don't know which side are you seeing him right now, he mentioned in his part as well. But whales as total monetization is gonna actually be a little bit heavier towards the IAP kind of base, because normally the ARPU of buyers is higher than the ARPU of non-buyers. So normally, if we're going to look into those 15% of top users in a specific window of time, you're going to end up, impacting the whales. You're going to understand your whales. and I put here, I didn't have another word, the squirrels, because they're already frantic.
Yeah.
The most active users, because with most active users, actually, there's a huge correlation with your whales. Those users will actually be a reference for the users that are more engaged in your game. And then you need to talk about how you define engagement. If we're talking about session time, or we're gonna talk about retention, the highest retained users, or I don't know, like there are several ways in which you can really define those users represent the top most active users and go after them. Those users will likely also include your top ad spenders as well.
Thank you. Eti, you made
okay, so I'll try to keep it short and not repeat ourselves, but yeah, just like Simon said, I mean, understanding what type of game you are and how you're making money, it's key. Having a well-defined event, I think it's one of the most important things to do UA with. So having that event for your game, it's really important. And I cannot express this. It's just test out a lot of events and see which one correlates the most with the success of the game and having a good campaign. So either if it's I don't know, it can be purchase, or in the case of your app that's ad-based, then it can be time session, match played, minutes spent, whatever. But just find that event that correlates with success. It's really, really important. And whales, just like Simon mentioned, I mean, again, it comes down to, is your game based on purchases or not? Then if it's purchases, it's easy. Top users that spend the most or spend the most. Or if not, like in a purchase base, then top users that generated the most money, which is not that they spend the most time on your game, but depending on your monetization strategy, is it the users that played most games or spam or whatever they did, but they generated more value for you. So just like those two tips. Get the event that correlates to success, super duper important. And then for whales, just pick the 1% to 5% users that generate the most value. Doesn't matter how, but generate the most value to you, either by in-app purchase or ad, and just focus on them. Use every tool that's out there on the market and just segment that, build like lookalike audiences and whatnot, and just understand what is it that those users have that the other 95% doesn't.
Well, thank you very much, guys. I think we are done with the questions today, and now we're going to go over the audience questions. Here, Maggie, if you want to moderate here.
Yeah, so now we're going to round it up a little bit. We have some questions from the audience. The first one is regarding user fatigue. Simon, how do you measure and think the ratio between the number of ads and minutes on your game?
Whoa, that's a heavy question, right? So
you can help me at the end as well.
Yeah, you can ask for help.
yeah, I will actually talk a little bit about that. I think that you need to have in consideration your user base fatigue, right? So normally, whenever you start seeing that, we were talking about base definitions, for instance. I'm talking specifically about Facebook, for instance. That is a very good example of a solution that allows you to bring, the lookalikes of your top users, and you are consistently trying to impact those users. You will start seeing that if you have a percentage of less than, I don't know what, like 30, 40% of users that are seeing your art for the first time in that base, you're hitting some kind of saturation, right? So, and it's really easy to see whenever you are there, you stop converting. So I think that the first element of watch out when you're talking about saturation of the base or the message, both, you need to look in consideration of your funnel. If you are not, change not only the creatives or the creative pieces, but the communication per se, talking in a different way with the users, you will most likely fatigued, you will most likely saturate it, and your IPMs, your install per 1,000 impressions, is gonna go down. That's the first sign, and that correlates inversely with your cost. So IPMs going down, your CPIs are going up. So it's gonna be harder for you to make an install, and it's gonna be more expensive. So my recommendation there, Etienne mentioned initially whenever talking about the strategy, to look into the market, and that's the first element. You need to really see what the big studios are doing in terms of communication, how they are selling their games, because pretty much all the time, whenever they are spending the majority of their money on the communication, those are creatives that are really converting the most for their games. So if you understand which is the game on the market that can be a competitor of yours, and you can actually reapply some of the learning from the creative side to your strategy, you are pretty much likely to have a very good conversion, that even though your base used to be, saturated, you can actually revive it, because maybe it's a user that has already seen your ad like 3 times, 4 times, the same ad. They don't care about the ad. They may care about your product, but the way you're selling it, is not speaking with them. So bring very disruptive creatives for that base. And in terms of number of creatives, that's a question that is very difficult to answer. You can say as much creative as you want, but only the best. So I normally like to keep in my communication at least 4 creative lines that are different to the same audience, because not all of us, even though we may be part of the same base, not all of us respond to the same message. So I try to have like 4 communications, one of them very gameplay directed, one of them very marketing oriented, selling the benefit, one of them very nothing, like totally different, maybe very, very different from what my game actually is, and the 4th one for whatever comes to my mind. So the sky's the limit here, but rely a lot on benchmarking from the big studios. That's, for me, it's the best point. Don't try to reinvent it. You may be able to come up with a great idea, but until we get there, try to reuse whatever the big studios are doing as well.
Amazing, Simon. Thank you. And this one goes for Eti. You have a lot of UA experience. Which channels do you recommend to start investing on UA, or your ideal media mix? What would be your suggestion for somebody that is starting?
So I mean, it's a kind of tricky question, because I mean it really depends on your app for me. So, but in this case, I would generally first, if you have no idea if you're getting into the market, just ask someone that knows. I mean, but there's also the Apps Flyer Index, and all the trackers, all the MMPs are nowadays releasing like which are the top partners. So that's also another good thing to have. But if you're just starting like a first partner and you're not really sure what you want to do, then I would go for a partner that I trust, that I can talk to, and that they are near, so that I can spend time, like they can come to the office and help me with other things. So I wouldn't only just select, I would select a partner, but I already have the knowledge. So in my case, it's different. But if you're starting, then it depends. Of course, I would go with Facebook, but if you're starting, like, I hate to say it, but having a Winclap like Leand go to your office and help you out, then that's really good, because they can give you the big picture. So again, it really comes down to how knowledgeable are you in the industry? Do you know how to run UA campaigns? Do you know how to measure them? If the answer is no, or I'm not sure, then I would go with a partner like a agency / partner, like in the case of Winclap, that they can go with you all the way. Then if you don't have all the knowledge and you already know what you're doing, then I would go partner by partner, going by volume and like potential. So I would start with Facebook, Google, and then yes, I would select other partners like Winclap, IronSource, AppLovin, and all the partners that just go with them. But that's my answer.
Great.
Amazing, Eti. You mentioned a lot that in the region. Having a trustable colleague is important. This is not common in the rest of the world. This is very Latin America, so take advantage of this. I believe all the audience that is here today is from Latam, so you have two experts here that you can, of course, run and ask for help. I don't know if you're available, guys, but I think you have a lot of expertise and people should know about it. All right, so regarding monetization by ads, what are the best practices? How do I know my ads are being sold at the best price possible? And if the ads are being shown and are the best fit for my users?
Leave it to Etienne.
Okay. Yeah, thanks, Simon. You're Thank you so much. So that's a complicated question. So first off, I'm gonna tell you, nobody has the answer to that because there are different technologies like header bidding that are still it's a process on the working that still, but what I would suggest if you're monetizing through ads, then have different setups of on your waterfall. So of course, everybody knows like the waterfall, it's when you have different position, the first impression of the day for a user, it's always the most expensive one because it's the one that has more chances of the user clicking and converting. So that impression is always the most expensive. So what I always try to do, it's secure as much eCPMs guaranteed as I can. So if you know you can sell those impressions at like, I don't know, $20 because you're big in the United States, then I would go to a partner and I would say, hey, I can guarantee your impressions for the first 2 impressions of every user for an eCPM of $30. And then you start securing those impressions. And I would do the same thing with the third and the fourth, but then it gets complicated because nobody wants the rest of the impressions. Everybody wants the first and second. So there's no way of guaranteeing that you're gaining the most out of every single impressions, but you can guarantee that you're earning as much as you can for the first 4 impressions. And that's already a lot. So again, I would have a good waterfall, like secure eCPM guaranteed with the partners. And then for the rest, I would open up to different partners or exchanges. If you have a lot of inventory that's remnant, that nobody's buying, then it's better at least to sell it cheap than to waste it and not show any ad. So I always have like a lot of partners from a monetization standpoint, and then try to get the best ones, eCPM guarantees, and the rest just have it there to secure that I'm still, even though it's not expensive, I'm still selling that space.
And also, I think that Etienne made an expert explanation there. But also, Lavia, you need to, I think that this is kind of like obvious, but you need to test maybe new placements in your game that may be more in line with the core loop of your game to actually improve the quality of your inventory. Because what Etienne was explaining is how to optimize the inventory that you have already found in your game. So keep constantly looking for new ways in which you can include new possible rewarded video or even interstitials in your game, and work with that to understand which of them end up bringing you the best value out of the impression.
Amazing.
Perfect.
We have a lot more questions, but we need to wrap it up because we're almost there.
One more.
One more? Well,
One more.
I'm going to choose it, and it's going to be, since you have a lot of experience, what would you say to a person that is, to a gamer that is starting, if you should give an advice like in one sentence, what would you say? Choose something.
One sentence.
Or some words. Like we have 1 minute, so it needs to be like in 30 seconds.
Okay, I'll do it. And then Simon can think meanwhile. But I would say take advantage of all the data that's there. Just take advantage of everything that's on the internet, and don't be afraid to reach out to someone else, even though it might be from like the company of your dreams. For me, for example, it's Nintendo. Just go out to them and just say, hey, I'm a huge fan, I'm building this, and you're gonna get a lot more surprises than you can imagine. So that would be my take. Just use data and just reach out when you want to. Doesn't matter to who.
I
Did you
should
reach
have
out
been
to Linda?
faster. I'm sorry, because my answer was gonna be pretty similar to that, and that's the beauty of this industry. Uh, be passionate about the product that you're building. That's the first point. Do not build something that you think somebody else will like, but you won't, because at the end you won't be passionate about it. And reach out. I've been working with gaming, and I'm passionate with I am in love with this industry because, as Etienne mentioned, if you have a struggle and you reach out to someone, we are a very open industry. We're a small industry, and even in LATAM, we are a very small industry. So to grow gaming, we need to grow together. So if you need help, reach out to us. If we don't have the answer, we can point you out to someone that has it.
Amazing.
You did the challenge in less than 30 seconds each.
Vamos.
Yay! You won.
Grandes.
So we're ending
Thank
up
you.
today. Thanks
Let's go.
everybody for the recorded. This session has been recorded, so you're going to be receiving it to your emails.
Well,
And
we look forward to see you on the future events or webinar that we could be hosting. Thank you very much, guys, for participating today.
thank you.
Thank you so much for having us.
Bye.
Yeah.
Thank you.
All the ones that joined. See you.